the final lecture on Ronald Reagan. And I just want to, because I know we did 1 and 2 last week, so let's just make sure that we're, reviewing again, reminding ourselves a little bit about Ronald Reagan. And so we know that he runs in 1980 as Republican ticket um, against Jimmy Carter. We know that, Jimmy Carter is not real popular at this time because of his, perceived attitude of being lax, not being, presenting the United States as the strong country. And we've had, the hostage situation, which we will revisit here today. We know that Reagan wins quite easily. We talked a little bit about his background. We talked about his early years in Hollywood, where he kind of, got caught up in McCarthyism. And, this is going to set the stage for his attitude towards politics. He's going to get involved in conservative politics. He's going to back Barry Goldwater in 1964, runs for governor of California. I know you're going, what? Republican California? Yes. And he wins twice, runs for president in 1976. Well, tries to run for president, but they choose Ford. And then he runs again in 1976 or 1980, wins. And we'll talk about what happens right after that, after he's sworn in a little bit later. But first, we know that there is an assassination attempt on his life. John Hinckley Jr. wants to impress Jodie Foster. James Brady, who's his press secretary, is hit, and he is ultimately paralyzed. About 10 years after this, I believe, the Brady Bill is going to be passed, which is going to limit different, bullets that can be used and different guns that can be owned. And we had several other assassination attempts and successes in the world. John Paul II, Anwar Sadat, Gandhi, John Lennon, some world leaders politically and socially. We also had the space shuttle program, which is going to be up and going. We know what that is, where you launch, on top of a rocket, basically a shuttle that will then get into the orbit through the rocket and can stay up for a longer period of time. The first one, again, is the Columbia. And then, of course, we have the Challenger that is going to explode within the first 2 minutes of it being launched, with Krista McCullough on it. And then we're going to talk about what happens here. As I said, January 20, 1981, hostages are going to be the hostages that were taken back in 79 are going to be freed, and we'll talk about that. We also mentioned AIDS. 1981 is going to really, become pretty much a pandemic. And Reagan really doesn't address this very much. It's, seen as being prevalent in it wasn't seen as, but it was prevalent in the gay community. And so it wasn't really addressed as, as it should have been. And we are still dealing with that today. So let's go ahead and mention, I think last time I did not really talk too much about this, and that would be numbers 18 and 19 on your worksheet. So let's go ahead and make sure that we do this. So we know in October of 1983, we are going to have a situation in Lebanon in which the there Americans are there, right? So we had put, several hundreds of American troops in the capital, Beirut, as part of a peacekeeping mission with other countries, um, and the Lebanese are not going to like this. They want us out, and so there is going to be a bomb that is going to be set off in front of the Marine barracks, in which 242 Marines are going to be murdered. And they are going to, we are, going to be greatly distressed by this. There were calls for Reagan to send in more troops and defend and, you know, make those pay for these deaths. And if we would have, but he does not. Ultimately, he does end up withdrawing our troops and kind of letting the Lebanese and the different, religions that are fighting there, different views that are fighting there, work it out for themselves. If we were in school right now, we probably, well, shortly we would be getting ready for the Memorial Day program, and we did have a graduate of a Butler High School that was killed in this bombing on the Marine barracks in Lebanon. So again, they did not want us there. They wanted to send a signal, and it was successful. We also have the Falkland crisis, which is the series of islands just south of South America, and Argentina claimed them. So did England, and there was some fighting that happened over, who owned them. Ultimately, England is going to win out. We also had two other situations, and this would be number 19. And you can see there, Lebanon, you can just kind of draw an arrow back up to, or you can leave it blank. I won't count it against you because you did do that in number 18. But in Grenada is in the Caribbean. And they were having a kind of like a civil war, and between basically the rich and the poor, the conservatives and liberals, that old term that we used last year, ones who wanted government to stay the same, which would be for like the aristocracy and the wealthy, and then the liberals, who would be the farmers. And they turned to communism. So we had the Soviets and the Cubans, because this is in the Caribbean, are going to back kind of the farmers and the poor people, and they overthrow the prime minister. And we are going to send in troops to protect the Americans that are living there, and also to try to bring back democracy. And so a lot of people did not like this. We thought we were sticking our nose into a situation, which we shouldn't have, but it was successful, and we were able to allow Grenada to be democratic and not turn to communism. And in Libya, which is in northern Africa, this man right here, his name is Muammar Gaddafi, and that is spelled Quaddafi, is their leader. And there are going to be a couple different bombings of kind of like the Marine barracks in Lebanon. One of the biggest ones is going to happen in Germany, in which some American soldiers are going to die, and American citizens are going to die. And our intelligence tells us that this man right here, right, the leader of Libya, is going to be behind that. And so, as this headline says right here, this is Ronald Reagan, and he basically, bombs Tripoli, which is their capital, and we bombed the snot out of it. And in April of 1986, and Gaddafi is going to be able to live, but it is a huge message to him, and we really kind of enter into a calm period with him, and so we don't necessarily have a lot of conflict with this. So these incidents where Ronald Reagan is going to, send this message. It's quite opposite of our previous presidents in the 70s, where we did not get involved, and we used détente. We reduced our size of our military. Well, Reagan is going to do just the opposite. We kind of puff up our chest and we say, "Don't mess with us." All right. So hopefully now you have 18 and 19 completed. Woo, I didn't click on the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and we'll come back to what's going to happen here at the end. All right, my slides are a little out of order. All right, so now we're going to talk about what happens in 1984. We have our first president, or we have a presidential election, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but this is the first presidential election that I got to vote in, so it's kind of exciting. I mean, I was a senior in high school, and I didn't pay too much attention to it, but I did. So I do have a little bit of a memory of this. I do remember Walter Mondale. He was the Democrats' choice. He was the vice president under Carter, and from 76 to 80. And he chooses Geraldine Ferraro, who was a representative from the state of New York. And this was really big because this was the first time that it was like legitimate that a woman could become president. And he being Mondale, is going to kind of go out on a limb by nominating her. Her husband is kind of put underneath the microscope, and some of his business dealings are going to be, put out in the news, and some people are going to accuse him of, doing some things that were illegal, and so it's going to kind of, question, is she the right person? Does she have a lot of baggage? Another thing that Mondale does is that he says that he's going to raise taxes because the deficit is going to be so big. For the first time, we're going to go over $1 trillion. And so he says, we have to raise taxes and to pay for this. And a lot of people don't like this, but they also don't know that Ronald Reagan actually increased taxes right before Mondale says that he's going to do this. But nobody really paid attention to what Reagan did. They just were kind of focused on what Mondale said he's going to do. Reagan is going to be successful in making Mondale look like he's, this free spending Democrat. He's going to raise taxes, but he's not going to cut any government spending. And so Reagan is going to win quite easily. You can see that it's still just Minnesota and the District of Columbia. And he is going to, win quite easily. The economy is going to start to kind of turn around, and the oil is low, interest rates are high, so people are, there is this good balance between how much money is out there. We're getting out of that recession. But there is still this idea of this debt. Okay. Now, we also are going to, as we're going to talk about, he's kind of in the midst of, he being Reagan, a little bit of a scandal that's going on. But he is going to be labeled what they call the Teflon president, because he is able to kind of deflect any, scandal or negativity. People were just really enamored with him, and they, tended to look the other way when it came to him. He was a very good speaker, and a lot of people, he was dashing. He had this, wonderful, wife, and just very, very easy to turn, and, not focus on the negative. Okay, so Reagan is going to win in 1984. So he's going to continue his second term. So let's go back, as I've talked a couple times. We just have a couple more things to talk about. I know I'm kind of rambling today. Let's talk about what has been, just kind of bubbling underneath Reagan's first term as president. And that is what had happened at the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency, when the Shah wanted to come to America for cancer treatment, and the Iranians, who did not really like the Shah, are going to say, don't do this. Carter lets him come. The Ayatollah Khomeini is going to lead the Iranians and kind of take control from the Shah. And that's when they take the 60 hostages from our embassy and keep them for well over 400 days, so well over a year. Well, when we are getting into, that second year, we're at the 1980 presidential election. And what happens is that Reagan is going to, and his, he's still running for president, all right? He's going to have these kind of secret talks, or his people are, with the Iranians, and say, don't, hold the hostages just until after the election. Don't do anything, because he knows that if the hostages are released under Carter's presidency, boom, that's a huge boost for Carter. There's a possibility that Carter could win. So there is this secret kind of deal that's going to happen. And they, being the hostages, are going to be just miraculously released, right? On, as it says, January 20th, on the same day that Ronald Reagan is sworn in. And for some people, they say, what does this, this is kind of a quinky dinky. And some people said, oh, well, it's because, the Iranians know that Reagan is going to use force, and he'll come in and take these hostages back, and we want to avoid conflict. Well, really, as we will learn later, is that there's a deal that's made, and the Iranians want military equipment. They want arms, okay? And so what Reagan does is he promises, I will sell you, arms, military equipment. But we're not supposed to do that. There are laws in our government that say, number one, we don't negotiate with hostages. It sets a precedent. And number two, this was a combative country, and there were laws that said we can't do that. And so he, being Reagan, really breaks the law when he does this. And what he does is so we take the arms, we sell them to the Iranians. The Iranians put the money that they pay for the weapons in a Swiss bank account. And that Swiss bank account, so it doesn't really have any ties to the United States, there isn't this paper trail. Then eventually that money is going to be used a few years later to aid this group in Nicaragua, all right, that are called Contras. And they are fighting the Sandinistas, the Marxist Sandinistas, who were communists. So in Nicaragua and in a couple other places in Latin America, there is going to be this as we talked about with Grenada, there's going to be this movement between the poor and the rich, and the poor being attracted to communism, as we've talked about, and the rich wanting conservative ideas, uh, and governments to stay the same, dictators or whatever. Um, and so we take this money. So as this starts to happen around the 1984, where the Contras start to get this money, Congress is going to start to look into this, okay? And this becomes a really, all this information about what Reagan had done is going to come to light. And this man right here, his name is Colonel Oliver North, is going to be the fall man, all right? He is going to be the one that is kind of this go-between between the Contras and the money that we had, kind of stashed away in this Swiss bank account. And so he is going to be found guilty of breaking this embargo, and illegally giving these funds to the Contras. But eventually he's going to be cleared. And of course, Reagan is going to say, I didn't know anything about this. Well, Oliver North is going to say, you told me to do this. You knew what was going to happen. So there was this huge, scandal, right, between, what was actually happening and what the American people were being told. Okay. All right, so that is one of the biggest things that happened during, the first, and then carries on into the second administration. And then the last thing that we want to talk about is what's going on at home. And so we know that, as I've mentioned, our deficit is going to be huge, right? First time it's going to go over $2 trillion. I know you're going, big deal, right? Today, it's what, 23, probably close to $24 trillion now with everything going on. So the question becomes, why is our deficit so high? And I know I skipped 23. We're going to come right back to that in just a minute. Because we did have a little bit of a recession. We did have we were still coming out of the recession in the late 70s during the early 80s. And so we are going to have a large number of Americans who are going to be hit very hard. Farmers especially are going to be hit hard. And so they needed a lot of help. And so they are going to get a lot of what we call subsidies, SUBSIDIES. And so it's like we pay them, as we talked about during the Depression, we pay them not to grow crops because there's so, maybe that would increase the number of crops out there or product out there that would drive the price down. So some of them these farmers are defaulting on their loans. And so we give them small loans so that they can keep their farms. And so that's going to be a great addition to our deficit. Another group that is going to cause our deficit to go higher is that we have people who are going to start drawing on their Social Security that had been paying since the 30s and the 40s, and now they're elderly, they're in their 60s, and they're ready to retire. They've been promised this nest egg that they've been putting into that we call Social Security, and now we have to start providing that. We also have a huge trade imbalance with Japan. That means that we are buying more than we are selling. And so, we are becoming, less of a industry producing and more of a consumer country. And this is really evident with Japan during this time. So there are some situations that are going to cause our deficit to go to go high. Those are just a couple of them. And so one of the other things is that Reagan is going to, as we've mentioned, increase spending on defense. Okay, he believes that we gain peace through strength. Okay, and so as we've talked about with the foreign policy, the couple of areas in Latin America, the couple of areas in the Middle East, we spend a lot of money on our military during this time. And this is, again, to puff up our chest and make, us look. And we're also, the Cold War is still going on. We'll talk about the end of the Cold War that's going to happen in the late 80s later on in our next lecture. So the last thing that we want to talk about is what we would call, and this is your 23, his attitude towards the economy. And a lot of people like to dub it as Reaganomics. And what does that mean? It's a different attitude than what we've had in America ever since the Depression. With the Depression, we started what we called Keynesian, where the government is, the main tool to fight unemployment and to feed people and provide services to the people. And Reagan is going to have a different attitude towards that. And he is going to have more of a conservative view. And it is dubbed, kind of affectionately called Reaganomics, but it's actually supply side. All right, you're going to see that term a lot. And so what he wants to do in supply side is give that responsibility for the economy back to businesses and back to the individual. And so if the government would cut taxes, okay, and then especially on the wealthy, then the wealthy would, and the big businesses would have money, and then they would go out and be able to invest that money in their companies, and then they would also buy products, which then would have to be made, so people would have jobs, and if people have jobs, then they're getting a paycheck, and then they would be able to go out and buy things, which employ more people. So that's called supply side, but it's also called trickle-down economics. And so if you give that money back through, lower taxes to the few up here, and then it's going to and it overflows, right? And then more people, and then more people, and then more people. Okay? So ideally, that's how it's supposed to work. But if these people don't keep spending and everybody else spend, then it doesn't trickle down. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And for the most part, it does work during this time. This quote is really good right here. Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. Okay? So April 15th is tax day, right? And so Democrats, right, are going to believe that, this is the day in which the government gets more money. We believe, he says, we believe, and he means Republicans, that, 4th of July is liberty, ding, 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 and all that. Okay? So Reaganomics is supply side, that trickle down. If they're creating more jobs, people are spending more, then people will be paying taxes. And so ultimately, instead of just the few people who have money paying taxes, now everybody's going to be paying taxes. And so ultimately, and more people would have jobs, that means less government programs, social programs to help people buy their groceries, pay rent, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that those same people then will be paying taxes. So ultimately, in his mind, and it does work, that it is a win-win for everybody. Less government, more independence for the people to be able to do what they want with their own money. The last thing that he also does is he also deregulates. And so regulations are rules, laws, policies that you have to follow, and most of them are for businesses. And if you have less regulation, less rules, companies are going to be along this train of thought, more flexible, more imaginative, and they are going to produce more and be able to employ more, and thus more people have jobs. So Reaganomics it does work. People buy into it. This trickle down supply side is going to get the economy rolling. And so in the second term, the economy picks up, and this deficit is going to be reduced a little bit. But again, it's going to be brought back up because of the defense spending that he has. And then, so we're going to pick up with that in our next one when we talk about how, he deals with the Cold War, and then we'll talk about the 1988 presidential election, because Ronald Reagan cannot run for president again. But one last thing is the last question, and that is Sandra Day O'Connor. Sandra Day O'Connor is going to be the first female to be appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. And she is going to be a conservative. And this happens in 1981. And President Reagan, in his 2 terms, actually is able to nominate 2 more justices to the Supreme Court. And both of them are going to be conservatives. One is Antonin Scalia, who just passed away, I believe it's 2 years ago, and Anthony Kennedy, who is still on the bench. And so these 3 judges are going to swing the bench to be more conservative. And this falls in line with the Christian conservatives that we talked about. More, less government, more individual mindset is going to be very evident during the 80s. So again, you should be able to answer all 26 questions now. Make sure you get this submitted, and we will pick up with the Cold War next time. See you later.